So we created some functions, and as you saw, functions have parameters. So we say div, call it whatever you like, and you can give it some inputs, which we call these parameters. Well, that's well and fine. You could think of parameters as inputs to the function. Now, can the function have an output? We say print a divided by b. Now, isn't this an output? Well, technically no. Just because you are printing something to the screen, that doesn't mean this is a function output. Okay? You may save something to a database, to a file. You may do something else, but none of those are the actual output of the function. You will only have an output when you use the keyword return. When you say return, then you may return a value from this function to whatever calling this function. So I can say return a divided by b. Now what I can do is call the function. This is the function name. I can give it the parameters and 2 and 2. And now the difference is this. I promise you, nothing will happen. 2 will be divided by 2, but nothing else will happen. Why? Because we're not printing it. But this function technically has an output. By the way, we call these arguments. So these are arguments, but who cares? That doesn't matter. So the arguments is the same as parameters. When you create the functions, these inputs are called parameters. When you're using them and giving them actual value, they're called arguments. But you use whatever you want. So what's going on here? When I return it, I can do whatever I want with it. For example, I can say a equals, and I call the function. So this value after this operation will be returned to me, and I can save it into a variable or do whatever I want with it. And that's the whole point. It's good practice to return the values as much as you can, unless there is a really a specific situation that there is no need to return it, or you don't want to, which by experience you'll learn them and you know when to use them. So as a rule of thumb, for now, you try to return everything. Okay, let's see it in code. So this is the code from the last video. We keep this add. We're gonna return a plus b, and nothing will happen because we didn't call the function. I'm gonna call it 2 and 2, and if I run it now, again, nothing will happen. F5, and as you can see, nothing is happening. Why? Because I'm not doing anything with it. 2 is added to another number, which is 2, but we didn't do anything with it. So I can say print, and as an input to this print function, I can call another function, and the result will be returned and given to print function. So isn't that interesting? So if you pay attention, now we know that input or print or many other statements that we use, they are functions. They get parentheses and they can have arguments as inputs, right? Whatever you want. Same goes for the print. When I was saying this input function always returns a string, because obviously in this function we are using the return keyword. Well, not us, people who created obviously the input function. So what we did here, we called our function like div, okay, and gave it 2 arguments, and then we said call another function like print. What's going to happen is first the compiler will compile this function. gets the value, returns it to this other function as an input, as an argument, and everything will be fine. You can save it to another variable. So as you can see, if you return the value, basically you're giving yourself or any other programmer who's using your code more options. Because you return the value, then the programmer can decide what to do with that value. But if you print it, then it's the only thing your function does. It just prints something on the screen. That's why it's a good practice to always return values. Of course, there will be situations that return is not that useful. So what happens if I do this? I'm gonna call print. We are basically calling a function. Then I'm gonna call another function. Then I'm gonna call another function, give it its arguments, then close the other function, and then close the last one. How will the compiler work with this? First, the compiler look at it from the right side. So this is the first. It will get executed and the value will be returned. Then this function will be second. Then the whole result will be given to print, and this would be the third function that is going to get called. So let's quickly jump back into the code. Now that I return the value, I can do whatever I want. I can say a equals add, give it two values, 3 and 5. I can print that variable, or I can say print, and I can then call the add function, give it whatever I want. What I want you to take away is that a function can have 0 to n parameters or inputs. Sorry, this is so messy. And it can only have 0 to 1 return. Later we'll see we have techniques to return more than one value, but technically it's still just one value. For example, you can return a list which contains a lot of values, okay? But a list is just one thing. So technically it's still one value. Let's go do some coding in the next video and make something interesting.